one going to be?
He's governed the small African nation of Malawi since 2014. Peter Mutharika is a lawyer and professor who ran for a second 5-year term in elections earlier this year. But opposition parties said there were irregularities in the vote and the High Court temporarily prevented the results from being released. The Election Commission has since declared the 79-year-old Mutharika the winner of that vote, leading to thousands of Malawians protesting against the decision. Police fired tear gas at protesters as the government accused the opposition of attempting to overthrow the president by force. Now, as he begins his new term, Mutharika faces several issues, including corruption, poverty and healthcare. We'll ask him what he intends to do to tackle these challenges. Malawi's President Peter Mutharika talks to Al Jazeera. Peter Mutharika, President of Malawi, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
My pleasure.
You were recently re-elected as president, but it was a most controversial election with all sorts of allegations of vote tampering. Was it a free and fair election?
Yes, I think it was, according to 6 international observers, the European Union, the Commonwealth, the African Union, UNDP, SADC, all of them said the election was free, fair, and credible. In fact, they even say that the Malawi election, the way it was conducted, should be an example to the rest of Africa. It was completely free, fair, and credible.
The problem, though, is how people in your own country perceive it.
Correct.
And clearly there are some people
Correct.
who say, yes, you're the president of the country, but not the legitimate president of the country. How do you win those people over?
Well, it's the opposition, obviously. When you say the people in the country, it's the opposition. The opposition decided they lost the election and they decided not to accept the results, the defeat, and I think they're trying to save their face by saying the election was rigged. It wasn't. But they're in court now. They're in court. So the court will decide whether, in fact, the election was rigged or not. I can assure you that the election was not rigged, free, fair, and credible.
You know the allegations they're making, and perhaps you know the name they're calling you, Mr. Tipex, because it's claimed that correction fluid used for typewriters was used to change the ballot papers. Do you think there's any truth that that could have happened in any polling station?
I know what all the polling officers are schoolmasters and head teachers. So they use Tipex to correct in schools, and they use the same material to correct. They're allowed to correct under the law. If there are addition problems or subtraction problems, they can correct the ballot paper. And that's what apparently they did in some cases, where there are wrong additions. They made corrections in front of everybody, all monitors, including ours and also monitors of the opposition. There was absolutely no truth whatsoever.
So you don't believe there was any way in which there were a few mistakes made, even if you believe the result was valid?
Maybe addition somewhere, maybe 2 + 2, they put 5. They realize it's 5, it should be 4. Then they take the Tipex correction fluid to correct that. That's allowed, they can make corrections. Because you add the votes from various polling stations to the tally center. In the process of adding, I'm sure sometimes mistakes are made. And if they discover the mistake, they correct it in front of all the monitors from the government, also from the opposition. So there's absolutely no truth or no sense whatsoever.
You've seen the people on the streets. As you know, this proceeds through the courts. How does this challenge to your legitimacy and your authority affect your ability to carry out the program you want to carry out?
Well, it doesn't. I tell you what, a number of things to take into account. First of all, they are in court. They decided to go to court to challenge the election results. And then at the same time, they asked for their chairperson, Judge Answer, to resign. Coming to a question, no, it doesn't affect. I've been carrying out development programs that are going on. We are building the schools, infrastructure, all the things I promised in the campaign and the manifesto we are doing.
At one point, you tried to ban the protests. Do you think that was a mistake?
No, we never tried to ban the protest.
You had a 14-day ban on protests.
No, it wasn't a ban. Actually,
what was it then?
Under the Constitution, peaceful protests are allowed, and I support that. I'm one of the drafters of the Constitution. I'm a comparative constitutional lawyer myself. What has happened, these demonstrations, or the 5 of them have been violent. Property has been destroyed. Over 500 people have been severely injured. A lot of buildings destroyed, schools burned, and so forth. Now, what that Attorney General did was to go to court and get an injunction to say that we want to stop violent demonstrations until the organizers of the demonstrations, which are really the opposition parties through the so-called Human Rights Defenders Coalition, until they can prove to the court that in fact they'll be able to conduct peaceful demonstrations. I swear to protect the people and also to protect the country. And that's what the Attorney General was doing.
So it's not
But
a,
it's
not
not
a
a ban.
restriction
It's not a
on
ban.
people's rights,
No, not at all.
legitimate rights in a
No,
free
not at
society
all.
to protest.
No. We all support demonstrations. But there's a protection of property. When you engage in peaceful demonstration, you end up destroying other people's property, injuring people, or intimidating people so they cannot move out freely. You are infringing upon their rights. No right is absolute. It's all relative. They must all be balanced together. All the 14 rights in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, they must be balanced. No single right is superior to the other. That's what we are saying.
What would be your message to those protesting?
I think my message is that they've got to stop this because there's no point at all. By the way, you are talking about protesting. We've had 6 elections. Every election they have protested. Every election that they have lost, they have gone to court and protested that it has been rigged. 6 elections. You know why? The Malawi Congress Party was the party that terrorized people for 31 years under the Kamuzu Banda dictatorship. There is no.
That was the man who founded your nation,
Correct.
but then led a one-party system for so long.
Not only one-party system, but one-person system. It's a one-person dictatorship, because the party did not count. It was a one-person dictatorship. But in any event, the party was associated with violence, killings, people disappearing, people thrown in the river to be eaten by crocodiles. People remember that. There is no way, I can assure you that, there is no way Malawians will ever vote for the Malawi Congress Party. That's why they lost the last 6 elections. And we know this one, they made in February, because there's a clip between Chakwera, the leader of Malawi Congress Party, and Mr. Ntambo, the leader of the so-called Human Rights Defense Coalition, which they agreed. We have the tape. They agreed that if they don't win the election this time, if they lose, they're going to cause lawlessness until the government will be unable to govern the country. That's what they're doing. It's a script that was agreed upon in February. The elections was in May. They lost the election, and immediately they started this thing. Now, we cannot accept this. We're being very, very tolerant. We cannot accept this. Now, the last time they wanted to go and close the airport and the borders. I said if they did that, the army would use force, because that would be aggression against the territorial integrity of Malawi. That I cannot allow.
Among those demonstrating are many young people.
Yes.
And I don't want to be rude, but the
Right.
opposition candidates were quite a bit younger than you in the election. In fact, during the campaign, there was even at one point a rumour that you had died. In terms of
I've died so many times.
in terms of succession,
Yes.
do you need to bring on someone younger to groom them to take over from you?
There are many young people in the government. In the cabinet, half the cabinet is probably under 40. They're young people. That as young as one of the people who is here, a member of parliament, she's here. I brought her as well. She's 23. I don't think it's necessary to groom somebody. This is a democracy. This is not a monarchy. I cannot anoint anybody. The people will decide in 2023 at the convention who should be their leader of the party and therefore their presidential candidate.
The big row in politics right now is about the election, but one of the other big issues in your country, ongoing issue since you've had democracy has been the issue of corruption.
Right.
It dogged your predecessor, Joyce Banda, the Cashgate scandal 2013, 2014. A third of the government's money disappeared.
Right.
There were allegations of corruption at the time when your brother was president. There have been allegations made against you even. How corrupt is Malawi?
I don't think Malawi is that corrupt, really. I don't think it's different from any other country. There was corruption somewhere. There was corruption. Biblical times, those high priests were corrupt, and there will always be corruption. I know 20 years ago, maybe 15, the Director of Public Prosecutions estimated that maybe 30% of income actually disappears through corruption. There will always be corruption, but we try to manage it. People are prosecuted. The Cashgate people, there are 57 people indicted. About 15 have been convicted. Some are in jail. We are fighting corruption. We have the Anti-Corruption Bureau. We are fighting that. Financial Intelligence Agency, we are fighting that. Fiscal Police, we are fighting that. And Director of Public Prosecutions. The 4 agencies, that enforcement agencies, they are there. They're doing their best. But also there's corruption in the private sector, in the media, everywhere, in the faith community. There's corruption like in other countries. What we need is collective action on the part of the central government, local government, parliament, the courts, the media, faith community, trade unions, civil society. All those, we need to work collectively to fight corruption.
Let me ask you, though, about yourself, because as you know, your former vice president, who then went on to be one of the candidates against you, one of the opposition candidates, claims that money from police rations, funds for police rations, ended up in your party's bank accounts.
Right.
Have you ever done anything corrupt?
No, I haven't. In fact, they're talking about one incident. What happened was we're trying to build a party headquarters. So we're raising money. Donations to build the party headquarters. And this person donated money to an account that's controlled by the president. Later on, we discovered that this businessman was actually involved in some kind of fraud. We didn't even know. Was involved in some kind of fraud at some point, and they suspected that maybe the money payment for that fraudulent, he had overcharged actually, that he used that some of that money donate to the party. Once we discovered that, we returned the money. The Director of Anti-Corruption Bureau has checked and found that the money was used to pay for the party headquarters. The rest of the money is untouched. It's in the account, and the account has been frozen now. I never benefited one kwacha, one penny. You know, it's politics. Everything's politicized, and people to get an advantage. So, oh, this person is corrupt. Oh, this person is that. It's politics.
Corruption is obviously just one of the economic challenges you face.
Right.
You have a country that's one of the least developed countries in the world. You have a lot of poverty in your country. How are you transforming or trying to transform the economy of Malawi, which mainly relies on exports of agricultural products, I think I might say?
We're trying to, in fact, you're right, because you see, we need to turn ourselves from an importing, consuming country to a producing and exporting country. And agriculture is the key. Because we have the common market, East Africa, SADC, African common market, but also we have access to the European market through what they call EBA, everything but arms initiatives, which I'm sure you know about. But to take advantage of those markets, you're going to produce something to sell. You have to have something to sell, manufacture something to sell. So we're going to manufacturing, value addition, mostly in agriculture, and we're working on that. Now, you talked about how do you improve the economy. We're engaged in a very extensive skills development program, training people, young people in various skills, whether it's carpenter, ICT, welding, building, whatever. We're doing that. So far, we've created 14 community technical colleges. By the end of the year, there will be 28, one in each district. And we hope through skills training and the infrastructure, building the roads and so forth, transport, making it easy for people from rural areas take their products to the urban areas to market. And 85% of our people live in rural areas. So they need to be able to sell their products. So we're investing in education, skills training, infrastructure, growth areas like agriculture, value addition, rural industrialization. If we can do that properly, I think Malawi can begin to grow. However, because of the riots have destroyed so much of the economy, I think we may have to revise the estimates, may go down a little bit because they have destroyed infrastructure, industry has slowed down, some people are afraid to open their stores for fear of looters and so forth. Brought us back, but I'm hoping that is temporary.
There is a trend in Africa of many African countries looking for economic transformation, turning to China. And I know that your country, it was back in 2008, you switched your recognition from Taiwan to Beijing.
Correct.
And you certainly have Chinese investment. I know one of the first things they built was your new parliament building.
Correct.
Do you, though, think there are dangers of getting too close to China and the Belt and Road Initiative, because you're perhaps not as close to China as some of your neighbours?
Why do you think that's a danger?
I'll tell you, some Western countries
Yes.
believe that China is pursuing not just an economic but potentially a political project
Like what?
in this. And you even heard the
colonize Malawi, Africa.
well, you even heard the Secretary General of the UN in his speech in the General Assembly say, I fear the possibility of a great fracture, the world splitting into two, with the two largest economies on earth creating two separate and competing worlds, each with their own dominant currency, trade and financial rules, their own internet and artificial intelligence capabilities, and their own zero-sum geopolitical and military strategies. Do you want to be in the position, Mr. President, of choosing between the US and China?
No need to choose. But that has always been the case. For the last 40 years, we had the Cold War. The Soviet Union one side, United States, NATO on the other side.
And countries had to choose. Countries in Africa had to choose that.
Well, to some extent, we had to choose. We had no choice because we were weak and we had to choose in the sense of depending on some. But I don't think Africa has to choose now. You see, we have reached a point where we are growing, and therefore we must take our friends from the West, of course, the traditional friends, they'll always be there, but the new friends, China, Japan, India, coming up also, Brazil, playing, and very soon there'll be a Russian African summit, as you probably know, next month. For the first time, then there'll be a Saudi Arabia African summit in November. So all these people, and there was a Turkish African summit a few years ago. So these are various groups, countries that are trying to engage Africa, to bring Africa into the global economy. I don't think it's a question of choosing, really. It's a question of engaging in economic relations with whoever we think is going to benefit us. When you say you're making a choice, it implies somehow, that we owe allegiance to somebody, that we are dominated by somebody that we must please. I don't think that's the way now to look at the geopolitical situation. I think more a question of engagement, diversifying our friends, and they're not mutually exclusive. They're all, obviously, they have their own interests, obviously. Every country has its own interests, obviously. There's no free lunch, we know that. But we also have our own interests, and we try to manage them in a manner that's beneficial to our countries in Africa.
Let me ask you about one of the biggest challenges that many believe is facing the planet, and that is climate change.
Indeed.
You were, Mozambique bore the brunt of it, but you were hit by Cyclone Idai and Cyclone Kenneth earlier on in the year. Your country's suffered every few years from droughts. How worried are you about climate change and what it could do to Malawi?
Well, very worried. Very worried. When I took over in 2014, in February 2015, was the worst flood, as you remember, in Malawi in history. A third of the country was flooded completely. And the rest of it was complete drought. That year it led to food shortage. Had over 8 million people who were food insecure, who had run all over the world trying to find maize. to buy so as to feed the people. So it's really a challenge. Now the electricity, 98% of our power comes from the river, from the lake. The lakes never have gone down.
So what do we do about this? Because the scientists say that the world leaders are not keeping up with the problem, and potentially this could become irreversible. Right. What do you say to world leaders who are ignoring this? I think of countries like, for example, Brazil, Australia, and the most powerful country on earth. Donald Trump isn't interested in climate change. What do you say to those leaders?
No, I think we will ask them to listen more to the scientists. Global warming is real. I don't know if you have been to Malawi, but you go there and you drive from Long to Blantyre. There are probably 30 or 40 bridges. Half of those, there's no water under them. It's the water is gone, they've dried up. I think we need to, when the AIDS thing started, people dismissed it.
And 10% of your population are HIV positive, yes?
But it's now much more down. I just had a meeting with chaired by George Bush, just came from there. Earlier on, it's gone down. Malawi has really improved our AIDS situation. It's getting better and better, but what I'm saying is when AIDS started, most people dismissed it. We didn't realize the dimension of it, now we do. I think it's collective responsibility. Look at the Amazons. What happens there? Those forests destroyed, the lung of the earth, whatever it is. I mean, the rest of the world suffer. It'll be worse, fewer rains than we have now. So it's a collective thing, and you see what happens in Malawi affects people in Wimbledon or whatever place people are, because it's not global. And I think it's very important that the leaders get together, as we did here, and they seriously look at this problem as a global problem. No country is going to live in isolation. It affects everybody, just like migration and employment in the world. That affects everybody. I was talking to the European Union last year. That my unemployment in Malawi, lots of jobs, that's why immigrant problem. So we work together to help me to solve unemployment in Malawi. We can do that. Those boys want to leave Malawi, cross the Mediterranean to come to Europe. They'll go there because there are jobs there. So help us make sure that the jobs in Malawi, Kenya stay there, so that our youth will not leave to go to Europe. So it's a collective issue. It's not for one country alone.
Mr. President, finally, what is your vision for Malawi? What do you want to be your legacy?
Well, I would like Malawi to be self-sustaining, first of all. Self-sustaining, certainly. I would like Malawi to grow, empower the youth, women, people in rural areas. That's why I introduced a skills training program to get our youth and women out of poverty. I would like to do that, and infrastructure to connect people in rural areas, connect them to the city. And I hope we can do that. We're engaged in a program of subsidizing housing. So people in rural areas, the poor people, families headed by other children, elderly people, people with albinism, all these people, we'll bring them free houses. And there's a subsidized housing. So they are permanent houses. And I'm hoping 10 or 15 years, there'll be no mud, grass thatched houses in Malawi. And I would like my legacy to be that I try to improve the lives of the people, ordinary people, rural areas, women, and the youth. I did my best. I tried to make their life better, to make life happier. Pursuit of happiness, and they say, American Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We need to pursue that. A happier people, and not a miserable people. I hope at the end of my 10 years, Malawians will be happier than they were in 2014 when I took over. And I think we're getting there. We're doing our best. And I very much appreciate your interest in Malawi.
Peter Mutharika, President of Malawi, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.